I've been working as a volunteer with the Launchpad Collective, and I'm currently working as a careers advisor. So most of the work that I've done with the Launchpad Collective has been coaching people about career decisions. And I've worked with people who are both looking for jobs and people who are trying to set up their own entrepreneurial business. And my own career has spanned both of those areas. So I've worked for many years in employment, um, and then in the last 10 years, I've mainly worked running my own business. So that's my introduction of myself. I'm also in this talk, I will give Katoga, shall I go on with the talk, or did you want to say?
Yeah. You can go on. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
in this talk, I'll talk for about 25, 30 minutes about my own experience in sort of running my own business, and I'm also hoping at the end that I'll get to know some of the kind of things that people are thinking about in the audience, what kind of businesses you're looking to set up. Because I think there's a slight difference between running your own business and running your own business as an entrepreneur. So most people who set up their own business use their previous experience and pretty much do the same work that they've been doing, whether it's training or interpreting or some specialist skills they have using those and selling those. Many people think of entrepreneurial businesses as something that can be scaled up very big, like Google or Microsoft. So more a kind of invention or an idea. So just to explain from my own side, I'll give you a bit about my own background and then talk more about the kind of challenges that I faced in doing it. So just, I didn't say earlier, I'm based near Brighton. I'm in a small town called Lewes. And when I was in employment, my university course had been in studying literature and Arabic. And I got a job in the energy sector because at that time, the oil industry was a very interesting sector. And the Middle East was very influential in that sector. So I started my career as a journalist, and then over time I moved to become an analyst and then a consultant, mostly in oil and gas. And that was for about 20 years. And then over the last 10 years, I focused much more on the new energies like renewable energies. I've been more involved in that growth area. So during my career, I lived in the Middle East and Asia. I was in Japan and South Korea and Singapore, and then in the Middle East in the Gulf region, which is the main oil and gas producing region. Now, at a certain point, the employment model can be very restrictive and it can limit opportunities. So about 10 years ago, I set up my own training company, which I called Resource Economist. And I wanted to set up a business where I would provide training courses on energy transition issues. So my background had been in oil and gas, and there's a movement from oil to gas to other forms of energy like solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, many different types of energies being developed. That business, I've essentially done what I was doing in my previous jobs, writing about and training people in that energy sector. And so I wouldn't describe that as an entrepreneurial business. It's certainly given me good revenue over the years, but it's not something that can be scaled up like an invention or some new technology. More recently, I trained as a careers counselor and I set up a company called Coach Creates to help people with their career decisions. And that business I want to scale up much more entrepreneurial, in a much more entrepreneurial manner, not just doing career interviews, but setting up structures to make it a kind of bigger and more exciting business. So I've run my own business for about 10 years, but I also am setting up an entrepreneur, what I hope will become a more entrepreneurial business. I said I'll talk for about 20 to 25 minutes. Maybe what I would like to do though is if I say anything that you don't quite understand or you want clarification on, I'll keep the questions mostly for the second half of the talk. But if there are things that you kind of feel you really want to ask immediately because you can't, you absolutely must get an immediate answer, please just raise your hand and I'll try and respond to that. And perhaps Kateba also, you could indicate if anyone's trying to answer a question, because ask a question, because I can't always see it on my screen while I'm giving the slides.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah. So in this talk, I want to give you my top 5 tips for running your own business, and just to acknowledge that a lot of the tips are because I made a lot of mistakes in running my own business. So some of them are not there because my business has been a grand success and I want everyone to copy it. They're things I've learned the hard way in setting it up. So the first tip is really important. It's, first of all, start with the basics. Before you start thinking about some grand plan to do something very that will change the world, first of all, have a very clear idea about what the basics of the business are. So have a clear business plan. Now, some of you may know what a business plan is, some of you may not. So I'll just explain it basically in a very simple way. It's a document for yourself where you set out the main description of what the business will do. And then you put in a business plan which consists of estimates of revenue and estimates of expenditure. And it's there, you can download from the internet many templates for business plans. Essentially what it does is focus you on the business issues. Many ideas seem like a great idea, but it's actually the implementation of those ideas and realizing revenue from them that makes a successful business. And the business world is quite unforgiving. Many people will say, this is the most exciting product, I've got the most exciting new invention, whatever it is, but actually getting it into the market and in a form that people will spend money on can be much more difficult than the actual having of the initial idea. So the first step is identify the market for whatever it is that you want to sell. And businesses always involve selling something. So it may be your own skills as an interpreter or as a teacher or as a trainer, or it may be some product that you've developed, or even some concept that you've developed. But you will always be thinking about, how can I sell this in the market? So that's the first thing, is have a clear idea of who you're going to sell to. The second thing is understand the costs involved in setting up and running the business. And it's often easy to underestimate those costs. Now, that can involve anything from renting a property in order to run a shop, or it could be getting investments in to realize a big idea. It can be a small investment or a large investment. Sometimes the investment might be funded by other people who are excited by your idea, but an understanding and having a clear idea of the costs is very crucial right at the start. The third step is know your competitors. You can have the most wonderful idea or be offering a service in an area, but if there are many competitors, it will be difficult for that business to be successful. And you will have to compete in each market that you try to sell into. So that involves a lot of research, like finding out what's already on offer in the area, either geographical or in the sector that you want to offer your business idea to. And then the next step is coming to actually set up as a business. So I just want to kind of explain that. So once you've decided, you've written your business plan, and you've got a clear idea of what you want to do, you then need to set up some way that you're able to do that business. And in the UK, there are three or four main ways that you can do that. You can either operate as what's known as a sole trader. That means you as an individual are providing the services or goods that you're selling, and all that requires is that you register yourself with the tax authorities, which is HMRC, Her Majesty's Customs and Revenue. So that's one way that you can do it. The problem with that way is that if you set up as a sole trader, you have no limitation on the liabilities if things go wrong, and your own personal wealth is at stake. So the route that most people choose is to set up a limited company. It's quite cheap to do, it's quite easy to do, but the actual cost of running a limited company is significantly more than setting up as a sole trader. You have to file an annual statement to Companies House, and to do that, you normally have to have an accountant, and then each year you have to file your company accounts, and they are published on the Companies House website. And again, for that, you normally have to have an accountant. So setting up as a sole trader costs you just the investment that you have in the business. Setting up as a limited company will cost you a minimum of about £1,500 a year to run the company. To simply do the documentation that's required by the authorities to run the company in a way that doesn't get that you don't get fined by the authorities for failing to do certain things. Now there are two other mechanisms. Two other mechanisms. You can also set up as a partnership. So in that model, you have an agreed shareholding structure. You work with a partner, but there, in a simple partnership, you also have unlimited liability. In a limited liability partnership, you have the same structures as a limited company. You're not registered in the same way, but your liability is limited. And the final one that you can set up as is called, let me just get a community interest company. And those community interest companies are essentially there to put something back into the community, and your profits are limited. They have to be shared with the community. And for that, there's another structure outside Companies House. I've never run a limited CIC, as it's abbreviated to, but there's a regulator of community interest companies, and your business must be registered with them. So I just wanted to invite, if anyone's completely lost it, what I'm saying, please raise your hand and say. But if I don't see that, I'll assume you're all getting what I'm saying. The other preparation that you need to do is understanding the legal requirements, and there are very strict rules in the UK about which are designed to protect against people laundering money from illegal businesses into the economy. So there are a whole set of complex regulations on know your customer, anti-money laundering, which have been put in place, including that limit how much you can trade with countries that are under sanctions regimes. So Syria, Sudan, Iran, parts of Iraq are all under sanctions, and you have to know the regulations around that. The money laundering thing has very significant implications. So I worked as managing director of a Russian company for part of my career, and our payments and our receipts were always being held up because the government and banks are quite suspicious of certain countries. So all of those legal requirements, important to know. Final one is setting up intellectual property. So there are ways that you can protect, if you have an idea or a company name that's kind of unusual and you want to protect it as a brand, you can go to the intellectual property office and protect the name. So I mentioned I run a company called Coach Creates. I went on the intellectual property office website and created a trademark for that name, Coach Creates. It cost me about £200 to do that. It was very simple. I didn't employ any lawyers who would have charged me maybe £800 or £1,000. But it means that I can use that name, and if anyone else uses it, I have legal recourse to stop them doing that. So that's my tip one. All of those are absolutely basic. You really must start by doing all those basic things, having a clear idea of the business plan, knowing the competitors, setting up in the best way that works for you, either as a sole trader, partnership, or limited company, and carefully working through any legal issues that might arise. Okay. So my second tip, I was never very good at this. I never actually got into trouble, but I was forever just neglecting it, was to manage your cash flow. So most businesses fail because they run out of money. And particularly if you haven't got a track record in the UK, banks will be reluctant to lend you money. You need to have banked with them often for 5 or 10 years before they will lend you money. So cash flow management is essential. So you need to carefully consider in your business plan, and also as you move the business into operation, how will you manage your cash flow? And most businesses do that through using some kind of software. So for my accounts in my own limited company, I use a software tool called Xero, Xero. But there are many others. There's one called Intuit. There's one called Sage. There are many different types of software that will allow you to keep your records systematically and also project forward how your cash flow is going to be in periods ahead. Now, you can do all that on Excel. There's no problem with using Excel. If you're skilled in Excel, it can be a very useful tool for managing cash flow. One of the problems with Excel is that the tax authorities in the UK have set up a requirement that limited companies have to provide information through the year on how their business is going. And most of the softwares like Xero allow the accountant to transfer records to HMRC, Her Majesty's Customs and Revenue, in order to fulfill that requirement of visibility and transparency. So that software will probably cost you anything between £10 and £50 per month to operate if you go down that limited company route. Now, the other big areas you need to think of are staff. Are you going to, in order to set up your entrepreneurial business, will you take on staff? How many staff and on what terms? So again, there are legal requirements around employment in the UK, and it's really essential as you move an idea into an actual implemented business that you get advice on how staff can be kept on and what their rights are. It's very dangerous to have staff on your books who are invisible to the authorities. So it's one of the things in the UK that's unusual is that staff only really get substantial legal rights after they've been with a company for about 2 years. So there's documentation when you take the staff on, and when you let them go. But many companies keep people on what are known as 0 hours contracts, or hire contractors rather than taking on staff, because the legal obligations are less. Next area is, and I can see a question on the chat, so I'm just going to have a quick look at that. I can't read it, unfortunately. Just give me a second. I'll get to the end of this slide and just pause to try and read that. So the next area you need to look at is, where are you going to work from and what equipment will you need? So if you rent an office yourself, you incur very high costs for rental, and also the rental of an office can lead you to significant financial commitments, because most leases require a large deposit and also maybe a commitment that you will hold the office for 1 or 2 years. So in a rental agreement, it's usually quite it's very complex. Again, I've moved properties for a business in central London. It can be very complex and very high cost. So one of the things that you can consider is having either a home office or renting a space in an organization like WeWork, where you are still paying them for the office space, but they have actually done the business of taking on the financial obligations to run the offices. And it's much simpler. You can get out much quicker. If your business is not doing well, there are usually ways out of those short-term leases which are kind of essentially subcontracted from a company who holds the main lease. So the other thing that I don't want to give you any estimates on properties, because it totally depends on how much space you have, how much office space you're occupying. The bare minimum that you would get by on with an organization like WeWork, they have individual desks, and they're about £250 a month. If you can work from your own property, that's obviously going to be a better way of setting up until you get substantial revenue in. So the other costs include insurance. And again, I just realized I'm probably going too long on the time, so I'm going to speed up a bit. Insurance, you must have public liability insurance. And usually if you're offering a service that involves a professional skill, you will need professional indemnity insurance. And it's really important to have those, because if you get sued, even if you're a limited liability company, you're protected, but being sued can lead to bankruptcy. And so you really want to have the right insurances in place. So with all that cash flow, think of unusual situations that might impact your business. How will you build a cash flow to cover any earnings interruptions? For instance, if you become ill, or if some of your staff members are unable to work, or if there's some major event like COVID, how are you going to protect yourself? And a final thing that you need to do is, do you need funding, and what sources are available? And that leads on to my tip number 3, Oops, let me just go back onto this.
Fine, it's fine, Peter. Don't worry about the time. Take your time.
Okay, yeah. I want to leave time for questions though. So the third tip, and these kind of like slightly kind of lighter, it's absolutely important when you set up your own business that you communicate and that you communicate well. So if you hatch a business that sounds good to you, you need ways to essentially empirically test, is this a good idea that will work with other people and will bring in revenue? And the only way you can do that is to talk to people. You can do surveys, you can do market surveys and things. There are other ways, but the best way is talk with your friends, talk with your family about the business plan. My kids are my best critics. If I come up with an idea, they say, Dad, that's just not going to work. You know, it's not going to work with young people. We just wouldn't be interested. The more you communicate your idea, the better you will get good feedback that is useful. The other thing that's really important is building networks of people involved in similar enterprises. So at the end of the talk, I'll give you a list of potential sources of networking. But building networks is really important. When it's very difficult, when you run your own business, you'll almost certainly need help from people. One of the key leadership skills is being able to ask for help. So that's a really important one. Talk to your bank. If you've got a good bank and they know what you're doing, they may be able to speed the process of helping you if things start to go slower than you expect and the revenue isn't coming in as quickly as you expect. If you've talked to them early on, you've talked to them in a professional way about how you're going to run the business, they will be much more willing to help you than if you come to them right at the start and say, I need a loan of $100,000 or £100,000 to get me started. Most banks will just look at you and say, fine, we'll keep it on our records. The other thing, it's very easy to hear criticism and not actually to listen to it. So when people give you advice, listen to what they say and adapt the plans. There may be also community resources that are available, and they can be a very good source of feedback in a particular area or region in the UK. A final thing, it's a bit more difficult because the government websites are often very difficult to find things on, but many government websites have detailed information about sources of funding and support. That's a good source of information, even if, especially if English isn't your first language, it can be a difficult one to access and feel comfortable with. Finally, my first business, Resource Economist, I did very little social media, very little marketing. I did it all through word of mouth, all through my contacts in the energy sector. I might, when I run Coach Creates and try to get it going a bit more entrepreneurially, have to look at social media to help with the marketing and communication. So having some knowledge of how to design websites, what's involved, how to communicate on social media, what the techniques are, can be very useful. But I would say not essential for a business. I might be controversial in saying that, but I think it's something that it's more important to be talking to people and having those personal contacts than it is to be blasting lots of information into forums where you may be simply ignored unless you've got 10,000 followers already, in which case it may be different. And it leads on to the next and one before the final tip: seek out partners. So in my training business, I got something like 50% of all my business by partnering with another large company who needed someone with training skills. In a sense, I cut myself out of some markets by doing that because I can't compete with that big company. But it's a very good way of generating revenue and startup capital. So business partners can widen your reach and open up new markets. And if you are in a business where some kind of intellectual property is important, or say you've got some kind of burning hot idea to set up a social enterprise online that will reach many people. Again, having a partner to work with can be a very good way to do that. So identify big companies that might provide related services where you can fill gaps in what they offer. If you see an opportunity, ring the company to discuss working with them. A lot of people go on email or electronic media as their first step, and it's not a bad way of introducing yourself. But I get each day about 50 emails from people saying, I've seen your website, I want to do business with you. And I'm afraid I ignore all of them. And the reason is that they're often computer generated, they're spam. So the best way to contact people is always, in my opinion, by first of all an introduction of some kind, if you can, a referral from a friend, or a brief email, but then follow it up by actually ringing the company, try and identify the individual. And then finally use networks. So the networks I've given you lists of at the end: Chambers of Commerce, Federation of Small Business, local enterprise partnerships. I can talk through any of those in the questions, but also online networks like LinkedIn, Facebook. If you can get in some of the groups on those, rather than just having your profile out on LinkedIn or Facebook, you can actually join groups where there are discussions relevant to your business area. That will help you enormously form the contacts. You can then ping people messages and send them a message saying, can I give you a brief call about X, Y, whatever it is that you want to talk to them about. So seeking out partners, a really important one. The final one is have fun. It's absolutely critical. It can be so depressing when you run a business and you're trying to get some business in, but it's not going so well, to lose heart, to kind of feel down, to start kind of feeling resentful that people aren't responding in the way that you expected. So motivation, absolutely key for business success. Running a business always has its ups and downs. I've had my downs as well as ups. It takes often quite a long time to generate interest. Don't expect immediate results, particularly if you're looking with funding. I just say on this one, it really requires a lot of persistence. You can think you've got the best idea in the world and go to 10 companies, and it may take a year to get any kind of sort of momentum going behind any funding idea. So with that, with all that kind of challenge there, ensure your own well-being and resilience. Families are a great source of support. Friends are a great source of support. Networks are a great source of support. But it's really important that you look after yourself. Take regular breaks from work. Enjoy holidays, even if time is limited. Have fun. Hopefully, enjoy your success. But if it's slow to come, just keep up your spirits and try and manage the ups and downs and keep going. I think in conclusion, there are some great, I'll show you the list of resources at the end. I think there are great opportunities in the UK. It's quite an entrepreneurial economy. And although we're probably not the greatest in terms of welcoming refugees, particularly with the current government, it looks likely that that will change in the coming days. But once you're in the UK with citizenship and the right to work, it is a very dynamic economy, and there are great opportunities. And I'll be very happy to answer any questions now on any particular fields. My expertise is in energy, but I'm happy to answer questions on any subject that you raise. I'll quickly go through